You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Professor Nancy MacLean is an award-winning scholar of the 20th century in the United States. I loved her book, Democracy in Chains, so much that I gave a copy to everyone on the editorial board when I ran the Chicago Sun-Times. She has demonstrated the intellectual and ideological underpinnings of the American right wing and its funders. And, subsequent to that book, others, I'm thinking of now Heather Cox Richardson, have followed in that path by writing about political history of the same movement. It turns out, same people, same money. And now Nancy is taking on an additional role as the fellow at the new Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom, and we're going to talk about all of that. Welcome. It's so good to talk to you again.
It's been a few years.
There you are. Yes, it has been. Absolutely has been. And you've been busy. I've been busy.
I have. I think we all have. But yes, yeah. I have.
Well, it's so nice to talk to you. Jeremy Young from Penn is a frequent guest on this show, and he's long argued that the attack on higher ed, like the attack on unions and nonprofits and on journalism, are all efforts to crush institutions that might stand between the right wing that you know so well and its ultimate control of our society. And now you're helping higher ed fight back.
Yeah, I think that is a very accurate depiction of what is going on. I think we all need to remember those words from Christopher Rufo, who designed the cynical attack on, what he called critical race theory to basically undermine anti-racism around the country and stop, any kind of efforts to create an inclusive society. But he actually said in a speech to Hillsdale College, this right-wing college, we are laying siege to the institutions. We are laying siege to the institutions. And he was advocating for that. And that is what we've seen, over the last decade. I mean, we have seen attacks on election administration. We have seen attacks on public health. We have seen attacks on K through 12 schooling, on higher education, on and on and on. So I think that depiction from your colleague at Penn is spot on. And we need to recognize what's happening. Yeah, I am thrilled to be part of the new Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom. It's housed at the American Association of University Professors, the AUP, which is also a union for faculty in higher education and defends shared governance. And it's a great group. We have about 12 fellows. People are doing all kinds of good work that I can tell you more about, but I feel like I've been talking for a bit here, so I'll pass it back to you.
No. I want to hear about this good work because okay. I worry that higher ed is not able to defend itself. I think the government is going to use very powerful and coercive tools. They can tax endowments. They can limit foreign student enrollment. They can reduce NIH and NSF research spending. They can reduce the amount of any grant that goes to overhead. They can, hold congressional show trials like they did a couple of years ago. How do you fight back against all of this?
Yeah, it is a big challenge, and we're going to need many, many more hands on deck for this. Actually, Penn has a group called Champions of Higher Education, which is former college and university presidents. So I am looking forward to connecting with them. But it is a lot. I mean, we've also seen in the almost 30 states that are dominated by the Republican Party, where they control the legislatures, that they have gone after higher education and the honest teaching of history, and any recognition of LGBTQ people, as they did in DeSantis's Florida. So one of the things that we've done in this center is try to document the extent of the attacks and what we're up against with that. So if people go to the Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom website, they'll see a very significant report on the manufacturing reporting of the backlash in higher education that reports on all of that legislation. We're also now starting to reach out to and work with professional associations, in different disciplines so that they can alert their members to the kinds of resources that we can provide. We're presenting at conferences. We're holding our own conferences. In fact, we'll have one in Washington, D.C., January 24th that will be open to the public and with partners like Penn and others. So, yeah, it's a challenge, but we've got to start somewhere. And as you say, it's too many administrators in higher education, I think, are engaging in what the fascism scholar Timothy Snyder calls anticipatory obedience, where fascist leaders can create such a threatening atmosphere that people begin to self-police, and to back up and to not do the normal things that they would do in fear of, setting off the fascist and authoritarian aggressors. And so, as you said, we saw that happening, a few years back with the congressional hearings. But we're also going to be seeing this now. I think my own institution, Duke University, has $1 billion in federal contracts. As you point out, that is quite the stick for, a tyrannical regime to be able to wield. The right has also organized large donors, particularly boards, people who sit on boards of trustees and conservative alumni, to rally them as a kind of battering ram to get the changes that people like the Koch network and donors on the right seek. So, yeah, we just need so many more eyes on this. We need faculty to respond. We need, alumni who have appreciated their institutions and want to protect them to assemble when they are facing attack or facing these external pressures. We need students to be active in defending what they value in their education. So, yeah, lots of work for everyone going into this new turbulent time.
I'm so glad you're doing this. I'm really terrified. At the end of the last Trump administration, they published their version of history, the 1776 Project.
Yes.
And it was,
I'm a historian.
You say
that is
You're
my
an
field,
actual scholar.
And it's appalling. Yes, it's just an exercise in national myth making. Really, I mean, and actually, there's a wonderful someone else you might want to talk to. My friend Jason Stanley, a philosopher at Yale, has a new book out called "Erasing History: How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Shape the Future." So, yes, these efforts like the 1776 commission that Trump convened in his last administration are really about trying to take from us, the citizenry, the capacity, the knowledge about our past that we need to navigate our present and shape a better future. So it is right up there with the efforts of authoritarian regimes around the world right now to rewrite history in a way that suits them and their followers.
I remember, I was 10 years old. I was in fourth grade, and we were like studying ancient Egypt or something. And I learned that, a new pharaoh shows up, and they chisel the old guy off the obelisk. Right?
Oh, wow. I did not know about that history then.
And they put the new guys up. And I thought, my 10-year-old self said, boy, that's not fair. There's something wrong about that.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd think Americans would say, sorry, we actually know that people were enslaved in the United States, and pretending that they liked it just isn't going to pass the smell test.
Well, this is like so much in our country now, though, Edwin. When parents are polled, as after DeSantis was attacking, honest history teaching and all the rest, parents, people do not like book bans. I believe it's 70 to 80% of people, oppose book bans, oppose these attacks on libraries. People want their children to be able to learn honest history because they understand that they need that honest, full history in order to, operate intelligently in the world. But what's happened is that, our politics have been so deformed now by the kinds of developments I wrote about in Democracy in Chains, the deliberate rule rigging, the gerrymandering, the voter suppression, the funding of a vast apparatus of disinformation, which is, Fox, the Fox network, and right-wing talk radio that fills the news deserts in rural communities around the country, the deliberate, cynical funding of Christian nationalism, to spark fear and loathing among, conservative Christians. I mean, all of this has been so calculated and so devastating that often, even if people have policy positions, like most do, where they support Social Security and Medicare and they don't want them harmed, yet they will vote for someone like Donald Trump, who's bringing in an army of, billionaires in his cabinet who want nothing more than to smash up the popular achievements of the 20th century, including public education, including Social Security and Medicare, including environmental protection and women's reproductive rights and civil rights of all kinds. So, we are starting off on a stormy period that we are all I think all of your listeners are, and, many of our friends and family are deeply alarmed about. I mean, one thing I can say, though, as a historian, is that, first of all, these bullies and authoritarian figures always overstep, right? They always exaggerate their power, and they do terrible things. I mean, look at our worst authoritarians, the American slaveholders, who, rather than allow any curbing of their property rights to hold other people in slavery, instead engaged in treason and seceded from the United States, right? But, and the Nazis thought that they were going to have a 3,000-year Reich. So, these regimes end up being brittle and flawed, but it takes people actively organizing, and widening the fissures in their coalitions, and defending institutions that we've worked so hard to build up over the years, and changing the narrative. And also, I think it's going to be really, really crucial going into the second Trump administration. Stop focusing on the man, right? This only makes authoritarian figures stronger. Instead, we should have, sort of laser focus on how the agenda that his administration implements is going to be hurting the people he voted for, right? And all those people who thought that they were voting against, because they were angry, understandably, that their real wages, have not kept pace with inflation, and that they've not grown for years. So there was, some legitimate anger out there, but, they're not going to get relief from inflation. Trump already told us that he doesn't think he can do anything about that. But what he will be trying to do is the least popular parts of his agenda, including the mass deportations, the efforts to turn the Justice Department and police forces and even the military against his enemies, his, self-described enemies, and all of these other things that most people don't want, didn't vote for, and will be appalled by. So even though it's painful, to watch this, and, many of us want to look away and did so for several weeks, perhaps, over the break, is really important to come back now, to stay calm, to look forward, and to focus on that which we can affect, right? Or that which we can use to show people, who this administration is really for and what it's doing.
Yeah, I mean, the way I couch it is we have to protect what we can, but I think the costs are going to be high. And I mean, you talked about leading us into a civil war, and you talked about the Third Reich. I mean, they didn't last forever, these bad guys, but the horrific slaughter was awful. I don't think we're going to have that level of bloodshed, but I think there'll be
I don't either.
Terrible costs, and people will be hurt. Yeah. So if we can't, we have to bear witness always, even where we can't help people. I mean, the Justice Department, I think just this week, took the cold case of the Tulsa massacre, in 1921, and they said it was a cold case, so they went back and looked at everything. And I just looked at this. They said, let me just read you this. The trigger for the violence of the Tulsa race massacre was the kind of unfounded condemnation that at the time commonly justified unspeakable treatment of black men. The allegations of a white man led police to arrest 19-year-old Dick Rowland for allegedly assaulting a white woman who operated an elevator he used. A local newspaper then sensationalized the story, and soon a mob of white Tulsans gathered outside the courthouse demanding a lynching, and it went on from there. It just strikes me as so now.
It is so now. I mean, and that's why we had also talked about the fact that my book on the 1920s Ku Klux Klan has just come out in a 30th anniversary edition. And I have to tell you, it was just bone chilling for me to go back to the text of that book and see how it speaks so dramatically to our moment, in the kinds of prejudices that, enable the KKK of the 1920s to become a mass movement, to enroll, over 5 million members, including in cities like Chicago.
Huge.
And Indiana was the heart of the 1920s Ku Klux Klan. But all of the kinds of things that we see coming from this MAGA movement were part of the Klan's, way of seeing the world, this sense that immigration was a terrible peril, that, African Americans and Latinos were not legitimate political actors in American public life. They shouldn't be, have access to or participate in American democracy, that women should be kept from certainly any kind of, rights of their own or, sexual autonomy, that they must be, watched over and commanded by their husbands or fathers. Just all of this stuff is so similar. And as you say, that role of rumor and disinformation in sparking violence and in leading large numbers of people to behave, in insane ways and violent ways because of agitation from the right, which, wanted, engaged in vigilantism in the case of the Klan, and ultimately wanted to create a kind of a race war in America in the case of the Klan. But we know also in the Trump administration that, or with the last Trump administration with this MAGA movement, they have really given such oxygen to the right-wing militia movements, and the white supremacist movement. So I was just reading actually earlier this morning the piece that just came out in ProPublica. It's called The Mole and the Militia, or The Militia and the Mole,
isn't that
or something.
A fabulous piece? It's a fabulous piece.
It was really powerful. But, what this individual found in going undercover and infiltrating these groups is that they have grown so significantly, because of all the disinformation and the agitation from Trump himself and from MAGA. And they are really untethered, and that adds to the combustibility of this moment. So, it's
what would you think?
We're all going to have to do a lot of deep breathing,
Well, but take a deep breath because, in just a few weeks, he's going to pardon some of the people who were involved in January 6th. So what does that do historically? How does that, what does that do to this movement?
Yeah, well, that's a catastrophe, and that will also further embolden these militia groups on the right and anyone who wants to engage in violent domination under the guise of patriotism. But, Edwin, I really trace this back to the Roberts majority on the Supreme Court. We would not be in this position. Donald Trump would not have been a viable candidate, certainly would not have won the election if we had not had a judicial coup, really, by the 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court that was put there by the kind of, right-wing actors, movements, money that I talk about in Democracy in Chains. Yeah. And they, they prevented him, and also Eileen Cannon, the Florida judge who blocked that case, but they prevented him from even facing a trial, let alone, a jury of ordinary Americans. And we need to remember that every single time Donald Trump came before a jury, whether a grand jury or in the New York case, he lost.
Yep.
Right?
He lost.
People saw that he was guilty. And when he's come before judges that weren't his own judges, like the Supreme Court 6 and Eileen Cannon, he's lost consistently. And so by delaying, taking up the case until the very end of their term and then granting him the immunity that even, King George didn't enjoy at the time of the American Revolution, by doing that, the Supreme Court really stacked the deck. That's the right-wing majority. So I think, part of what all Americans have to understand, too, is the range of actors involved in all this. Because, yes, there are these kind of unhinged, people in the militias, but there are also, wealthy, Yale and Harvard trained actors like Justice Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and et cetera, Samuel Alito, who are engaging in creating tyranny in America. And I think we really need to start calling them out as well and drawing as much attention to them and to the illegitimacy of that Supreme Court majority as we can.
You're preaching to the choir here. I love it. Before we go, I want to just turn back to your work with the AAUP. And do I have this right? It was partly founded by John Dewey. And he was, I think, a terrible writer, but a wonderful thinker if you take the time with his writing. And he talked about how important education is to how education and democracy are they go together. They create that if you in what you're doing in protecting free speech and free thought is the sort of the base requirement for us being able to sustain democratic governance or even any kind of self-control.
Well, I think you said it beautifully there. And Chicago, of course, was home to John Dewey and the work that he did at the University of Chicago. But yes, a great theorist of democracy, a great American pragmatist thinker who really understood. He has a book called Democracy in Education, but understanding that, and also just for the larger question of public education, none of our institutions are perfect or are pure. In a society that's been as class and as racially divided as America has been, that taints everything. And yet our public school system, has been pretty extraordinary over the generations in creating connections and enabling people to see their shared interest in a democracy, which is, in fact, our only alternative to domination by powerful interests like corporations, right? But helping people to grow and develop as individuals, to appreciate what's going on in their society and their natural world. I'm looking out at the beautiful kind of ice that's melting after snow here in North Carolina. I mean, education has had extraordinary power, and our higher education system has been the envy of the developed world, of the rest of the world, not the developed world, the whole world. So, it's ironic that it's coming under attack when it actually has been so successful. Now, it has major flaws, like how expensive it's become, but that was also because of these same kinds of actors, on the right, pushing to to cut taxation, and tax support of public higher education to push more of the tuition burden back on students, et cetera. So there are real issues that we have to deal with. But what we need to understand is that to solve those issues, we need more and better democracy, not less. And we have to realize that we all depend on these public goods, whether it's education or clean air and water or public health or, so many of these things that affect the quality of our lives and society. And so I think what's happening now, we can all agree is terrifying and awful in so many ways. But I think a countercurrent to that that's really developed over the last decade or so is so many more people getting involved, in trying to make democracy work, in trying to protect these institutions. So, there's groups like the Network for Public Education, started by Diane Ravitch, and others, they're working on schools issues, as you said, Penn, on issues of free speech. The AUP, when I was starting graduate school, to the extent that we heard about it at all, it seemed kind of like a stuffy thing for men with, tweed jackets and patches and maybe even a pipe back then. But it's very different from that now. And the AUP, it's also a union now and has won some amazing contract battles that also defend academic freedom. But it has also really come to the aid of faculty and of all kinds, not just tenure track, but contingent faculty too, who have come under attack from the right, scurrilous attack. And you know how that goes. They put something on Fox News, and the next thing you know, you're getting desperate, and so forth and so on. So, and actually, if you do have any faculty folks listening, they could look up something called Faculty First Responders, which is part of our Center for Defending Academic Freedom. It's related to it, but it's a website that provides resources for anyone who comes under such attack, for that individual, for their administrations, for their communities, et cetera. So, again, lots of resources to be found on that website if people are interested and concerned. And I really appreciate your having me on to air some of these issues.
Professor MacLean, anytime you're willing to talk, I would love it. I think your work is brilliant, and it is important, and it is timely, and all three of those together, and it's an amazing thing to have happen. So thank you so much, and I love that you are taking I don't know. You're such a good scholar and a good teacher, but now you're taking it into the realm of a different kind of fight. I wish you all the strength and the good fortune that we need you to have.
Thank you so much, Edwin, and thanks for having me on your show. I'm so impressed at the list of guests. You've had some of my heroes, including Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who's such a hero in the fight against corporate capture of government, and my own Anderson Clayton of the North Carolina Democratic Party, who's reviving the party in the state. She's just incredible, Yeah,
not like your Supreme Court, but that's a different story.
Yeah. Although I do think they're going to lose that one. It's a little bit too outrageous, but we'll see.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.